What would you do if you woke up one morning and found that your backyard had been turned into a theme park overnight, without your permission? That was the reality I faced. I had gone to sleep in my quiet home, expecting nothing more than the usual peaceful morning. But when I stepped outside, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I was met with a sight so surreal that for a few seconds, my brain refused to process it. Towering above my fence line was a massive, neon-lit sign with cartoon characters grinning back at me. The words, HOA Family Fun Park, Grand Opening, stretched across the banner in bold, flashing letters. I blinked, half convinced I was still dreaming. But the sounds told me otherwise. The unmistakable screech of roller coasters, the booming bass of carnival music, and the excited shrieks of children filled the air. My heart pounded. This had to be a mistake. I stepped forward cautiously, my bare feet pressing into the damp grass as I followed the newly paved sidewalk that had mysteriously appeared on my property. My once secluded yard, my sanctuary, was now overrun with strangers. People walked casually across what used to be my flower beds, eating cotton candy and snapping selfies like they were at Disneyland. I scanned the area, my stomach twisting in disbelief. Rides stretched as far as I could see. A carousel spun just feet from my back porch. A line of people waited for a mini train ride that now cut straight through my garden. Had I lost my mind, or had my land been stolen right out from under me? I pushed through the crowd, making my way toward the entrance where the HOA's new theme park map was proudly displayed. My eyes locked onto a section of the map labeled New Expansion Zone. My heart dropped. The property that I had spent years maintaining, the land I legally owned, was now marked as part of the park. No notice, no discussion, no signature, just gone. Something deep inside me snapped. I turned on my heel and stormed back into my house. If the HOA thought they could take my home without a fight, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I didn't waste any time. The moment I stepped back into my house, I grabbed my property deed, tax records, and the original survey map I had kept since the day I bought the land. I spread them out across my kitchen table, my fingers tracing the familiar lines that clearly marked my boundaries that had suddenly become meaningless overnight. My land, my home, had been stolen right in front of me. And now, I was going to find out how. With my documents in hand, I stormed over to the HOA office, my anger simmering beneath a layer of forced composure. The front desk receptionist greeted me with a smile that was far too cheerful for the situation at hand. When I demanded an explanation, she handed me a thick packet of HOA development plans, as if it were just another harmless community project. "We're so excited about the new theme park expansion," she chirped, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to my frustration. "It's going to bring so much value to the neighborhood." Value? My home had just been turned into a carnival attraction without my consent, and they had the audacity to call it an improvement? I gritted my teeth and flipped through the documents, my eyes scanning over zoning adjustments and land use optimizations, filled with legal jargon designed to confuse homeowners into compliance. But there, buried in the fine print, was the boldest lie of them all, a statement claiming that the homeowners affected by the expansion had voluntarily agreed to the changes. I hadn't agreed to anything. Before I could demand answers, a voice cut through the room, one that immediately set my nerves on edge. Well, if it isn't the one resident who just refuses to get with the program. I turned to see her, Karen. She walked toward me with the smugness of someone who believed she was untouchable, her high heels clicking against the tile floor. She was exactly the type of person I expected to be running this operation, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, designer purse in hand, and an expression that reeked of entitlement. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "Would you care to explain why my land is suddenly part of an amusement park?" She scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's not your land anymore. The HOA has been working on this for months. Everything was done legally. I stepped forward, holding up my deed and property survey. No. It wasn't. I never signed anything. I never agreed to this. Karen rolled her eyes like I was a child throwing a tantrum over spilled juice. That's because you're thinking small. This park is a huge investment for the community. You should be grateful your land was chosen. Property values will skyrocket. I clenched my fists, my patience wearing dangerously thin. I don't care about property values. I care about my home. You can't just take people's land and pretend it's for the greater good. Her lips curled into a condescending smirk. Actually, we can. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a tone dripping with mock sympathy. You see, the HOA made a proposal to the city, arguing that your lot was underutilized. Since the new park would be open to the public, they approved the reclassification. It's called eminent domain. Ever heard of it? I had. But this wasn't how eminent domain worked. That law was meant for government projects, not private amusement parks run by HOA board members lining their own pockets. My grip on the documents tightened. This is theft. Karen's smirk deepened. It's progress. She turned on her heel, ready to dismiss me entirely, but I wasn't finished. You didn't just steal my land, I said, my voice cold. You sold it. Karen froze for a fraction of a second, just enough for me to see the flicker of realization that I knew too much. She recovered quickly, flipping her hair over her shoulder. I have no idea what you're talking about. But she knew exactly what I was talking about. And that meant I was onto something bigger. Without another word, I left the office, my blood boiling, my mind racing. I wasn't just dealing with an overreaching HOA. This was something much worse. Someone had profited from this, and I was going to find out who. The moment I stepped out of the HOA office, I knew this was bigger than a simple zoning dispute. Karen's reaction had given her away. She wasn't just enforcing some bureaucratic decision, she was hiding something. I could feel it. And if there was one thing I knew about corruption, it was that it always left a trail. I needed proof. That night, I spread every document I had across my kitchen table, my deed, my property tax records, old maps, HOA notices, anything that could help me untangle their scheme. I took a deep breath, knowing I needed to go deeper. The HOA's documents had deliberately buried their land grab under layers of legal jargon, but there had to be something more. I started by comparing old and new property maps, scanning for discrepancies. It didn't take long before I saw it, a slow, calculated shifting of boundary lines over time. The HOA had been redrawing property lines in small increments, enough to keep it under the radar but significant enough to eventually absorb entire sections of land. My lot wasn't the only one affected, other homeowners had lost slivers of their land, likely without even realizing it. Furious, I dug deeper, searching county records for recent property transactions. What I found made my blood run cold. The HOA hadn't just taken my land, they had sold it. A real estate investor named Thomas Whitmore had purchased it at a suspiciously low price, and on the transaction record, there was a signature authorizing the sale. My forged signature. A wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just an overreach of power, this was outright fraud. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. The pieces were coming together. The HOA had been quietly altering property lines, reclassifying lots as underutilized, and then illegally selling them to private investors. And Karen? She was right at the center of it all. I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I was about to expose an entire scheme. I needed more evidence. I drove to the local town hall first thing in the morning and requested records of all HOA property sales from the past 5 years. The clerk hesitated but eventually handed over a stack of documents. I flipped through them, my hands shaking with rage. Multiple homeowners had voluntarily transferred their land, except I was willing to bet that none of them had actually agreed to it. Then, my phone buzzed. A private message from an anonymous account had appeared on my blog post. "I saw what the HOA did to you. You're not alone. I have proof. Let's talk." I replied immediately. Minutes later, I was sitting in a coffee shop, face to face with Lucas Hayes, a former HOA employee. I knew something was off the moment Karen started holding private meetings about rezoning, he said, glancing around as if expecting to be overheard. At first, I thought it was just typical HOA nonsense, power plays, favoritism, the usual. But then I saw the paperwork. I leaned in. "What kind of paperwork?" Lucas pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos of internal HOA emails, memos, and meeting notes. They were planning this for years. Redrawing lot lines. Shifting land classifications. Pressuring city officials to approve rezonings under false pretenses. The theme park? That's just the latest scam. Karen's been selling off land to developers in exchange for kickbacks. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just theft, it was organized corruption. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked cautiously. Lucas exhaled. "Because it's wrong. And because you're actually fighting back." I nodded. "I need these documents. I'm taking them to the press." He hesitated for only a second before forwarding every file he had. "Be careful," he warned. "Karen isn't just some HOA busybody. She's got connections. People who stand to lose a lot of money if you expose this." I knew what he meant. This was about more than just my land now. I had enough proof to take this to the media, and once the public knew what was happening, the HOA wouldn't be able to silence me anymore. But Karen wasn't done fighting either. By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up with furious emails from the HOA, threatening legal action for defamation. Worse, someone had posted online that I was a hostile resident who had threatened HOA members. They were trying to turn the community against me. But it didn't matter. Because now, I had proof. And I was going to make sure the world saw it. The retaliation started almost immediately. The moment I went public with my findings, the HOA, and more specifically, Karen, shifted into full attack mode. First, it was the online smear campaign. Within hours of my blog post going viral, a flood of anonymous comments and posts started appearing in local community groups. They painted me as a troublemaker, an unstable neighbor who hated progress, someone who just wanted to stir up drama. According to these posts, I was harassing HOA board members, threatening legal action over nothing, and even trying to incite violence against innocent community volunteers. I wasn't surprised. Karen was spinning the narrative, controlling public perception. It was the oldest trick in the book: if you can't silence the truth, discredit the person telling it. But she didn't stop at words. The next day, I found a formal HOA complaint taped to my front door. It was an official warning, accusing me of disrupting community peace and engaging in hostile behavior toward HOA officials. The document threatened legal action if I didn't cease all defamatory statements immediately. Defamatory statements? I had provided evidence. Karen knew I was right, but she was betting that enough noise, enough lies, and enough intimidation would make me back down. I refused to. Instead, I forwarded every threatening email, message, and online post to my lawyer. I wasn't just going to fight this, I was going to document everything. But then things escalated. Late one evening, as I was going over the latest legal documents with my lawyer, I heard something outside, a rustling near my driveway. My stomach tightened. Ever since I'd started exposing the HOA's corruption, I had felt like I was being watched. I stood, my pulse quickening, and moved toward the window, carefully peeking out. A dark SUV idled at the curb, its headlights off. For a few moments, it just sat there, the driver invisible behind tinted windows. Then, as if sensing my gaze, the vehicle suddenly peeled away, tires screeching as it disappeared into the night. I took a slow breath, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I got an unmarked envelope in the mail. No return address. No postage stamp. Just a plain white envelope slipped into my mailbox by someone who didn't want to be seen. I opened it cautiously, half expecting another empty legal threat. Instead, a single sheet of paper fell into my hands. It was typed. No name. No signature. Just a short, chilling message. Stop now or face the consequences. I exhaled sharply, my grip tightening on the paper. It wasn't just an empty warning. It was a threat. For the first time since this started, I felt something new creeping into my chest, fear. Not because I was afraid of Karen. But because whoever was behind this was desperate. And desperate people did dangerous things. But fear wouldn't stop me. If anything, it proved I was hitting too close to the truth. Karen and her cronies were afraid of exposure. They had resorted to threats because they knew they couldn't erase the facts. So I did what they least expected, I doubled down. That afternoon, I met with a local journalist who had been following the story. I handed over every document, every email, every piece of evidence I had gathered. If something happened to me, the truth wouldn't disappear. It would be out there for everyone to see. And then, as if the universe wanted to confirm that I was on the right track, the biggest twist of all happened. A ride at the HOA's new theme park malfunctioned. A safety harness on one of the rides failed, causing a young child to fall and break his arm. The incident spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and suddenly, the very people who had been defending the HOA were questioning everything. Why wasn't the ride properly inspected? Why had the park been rushed into operation? And why had the HOA ignored safety regulations to make it happen? The incident was Karen's worst nightmare. She had been so focused on silencing me, on covering up the fraud, that she had overlooked the consequences of cutting corners. And now, there were real victims. The HOA tried to downplay it, calling it a minor accident, but the truth was already out. More homeowners started coming forward with complaints, their property lines had been altered, their taxes had mysteriously increased, their voices had been ignored. The tide was turning. Karen had spent weeks trying to bury my claims, silence my voice, and destroy my credibility. But now, the entire community was watching. And she couldn't hide anymore. The day of the trial arrived, and I walked into the courthouse with my head held high. Months of research, countless sleepless nights, and endless battles against Karen and the HOA had led to this moment. I had been threatened, smeared, and nearly run out of my own home, but now, with the weight of evidence behind me and the community finally seeing the truth, it was time for justice. Karen sat across from me at the defendant's table, still wearing that smug expression, though for the first time, I saw something else lurking behind her eyes, fear. She had spent so long believing she was untouchable, bending the rules to her will, but now she was staring down the consequences of her arrogance. The judge listened as my lawyer laid everything out, the forged documents, the illegal sale of my land, the fraudulent zoning approvals, and the shocking disregard for public safety that led to a child's injury. Every lie Karen had spun, every underhanded tactic the HOA had used, was now laid bare for everyone to see. The courtroom was silent as the evidence mounted, as emails and secret meeting notes confirmed what I had been saying all along: this wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate, calculated land grab, orchestrated by Karen herself. And then came the final blow. The forensic analyst took the stand and confirmed that the contract approving the sale of my land had been forged. Karen's confidence shattered in real time. She tried to argue, tried to lie her way out of it, but the judge wasn't buying it. Neither was the community. When the verdict was read, the HOA found guilty of fraud, forgery, and unlawful property seizure. Karen paled. The court ordered my land restored, the theme park shut down, and a full investigation into financial mismanagement within the HOA. The moment Karen realized she had truly lost, she turned to me, her face red with fury, and hissed, "You don't know what you've done." But I did. I had proven that no one, not even a power-hungry HOA Karen, was above the law. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me, eager for a statement. But I didn't need to say much, the truth had already spoken for itself. As I walked back to my now reclaimed home, I couldn't help but wonder, how many others had been victims of HOAs just like mine, bullied, tricked, and pushed out of their own property. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.